I kept applying it, jobs that were in my area of expertise, and I wasn't hearing back from them. And finally, I got the courage, and on LinkedIn, I remember finding out who either the VP of HR or something like that was. And I was like, you need to hire me. I've worked on some epic stuff. And I don't remember the exact message, something like that. And I got a phone call from some HR person like the next day.
Who would have known that reading Reentry would lead me to fly to Maine to interview someone who is very integral in the early success of Falcon 9? Could I get you to sign this?
Totally.
I wanted to learn about the super densification of liquid oxygen, so I interviewed Phillip Rench to learn more in person. Today, the Falcon 9 rocket runs like clockwork, but like SpaceX, it too had humble beginnings. Phillip Rench may have not been at SpaceX during the early Falcon 1 days on a remote island, but he is one of the brilliant minds behind solving early Falcon 9 issues, including the hard problem of densifying liquid oxygen, which you'll learn about later in this video.
So I started at SpaceX in 2014. I was hired to be one of the engineers on Launchpad 39A. As soon as we took it over from NASA, essentially the first thing we had to do was start ripping out all of the old shuttle and even the old Apollo equipment that still existed, and start designing it for the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and also the Crew Dragon spacecraft.
While there were many hurdles in making Falcon 9 what it is today, they had no shortage of money to get it working.
Luckily, we had, we pretty much, for the most part, in SpaceX terms, we had pretty much an unlimited budget. When everything we wanted, we got pretty much, and we had, for the most part, as much time as we needed to build it until the Amos accident on Slick 40. And then we were pretty much about 90% complete the launch pad at that point. And then we had to hurry to finish the last 10%.
SpaceX is known for its rapid iteration and breakneck pace. Once SpaceX proved they could send a rocket to space as a private company, under Elon Musk's directive, the clock began ticking to make us a spacefaring civilization. Rebuilding the historic Pad 39A was no simple task, but it needed to be reworked to support this new generation of rocket.
Yeah, it was pretty nuts, especially towards the end when we had to switch gears, finish the launch pad. The timeline was tight. And, we were under a lot of pressure. That first launch from 39A, it had to be successful to get, an operational pad on Florida working again. So yeah, those timelines were quite extensive. It doesn't even seem real, to be honest. It all feels like a dream. Most people I talked to that worked at SpaceX, especially during that time period, it just feels like almost like a fog almost. It's like you remember the broad details, but when you sit back and think about the finer strokes, it really starts dawning on you. Reading Eric's book, brought back a lot of memories that you're like, oh man, if only people on the internet knew what actually happened or what the smaller details were. Good thing about Eric's book is he brought a lot of those details to light.
Eric's book brings the stories and the people behind the SpaceX success into the spotlight. I was particularly interested in meeting Phillip and telling you his story because he comes from an unlikely background, working at Seaworld before SpaceX. This isn't your traditional aerospace background, but surprisingly, many of the strengths he had working at Seaworld translated into working with rockets.
2013-ish, I was working at SeaWorld Orlando, primarily working on roller coasters. However, I was assigned to the special project to develop a safety system that could essentially lift the whales out of the water in the event of an emergency. And it was absolutely a nutso project that it worked. It was, most people that watched that thing come up couldn't believe what was actually happening. And it was just so funny that happened was all the equipment that we used on it, there were these very specialized valves and pressure transducers. There was an accident at SeaWorld. A whale trainer was killed, unfortunately. I knew her. I knew some of the whale trainers. So it wasn't super close, but I knew her from a distance. And so they took all the trainers out of the water with the whales, and SeaWorld was trying to come up with some mechanism or some way we could safely have this interaction happen again. And so the engineers, we put our heads together and we came up with this unique solution. And it worked. And then I think it went through the courts, and the courts ended up shutting it, the whole thing down. And so the project kind of fell apart after that.
Seriously?
Yeah, so I can't remember the exact reason, but I remember It went through a court case. I think it went up to the Court of Appeals, and eventually, yeah, we were told it wasn't going to happen.
But the idea was if there was another emergency like what happened with Tillicum, that you guys could have just, lifted?
Yeah, hit a button and the whole floor would raise up and beach the whale, and then you could go ahead then and rescue the trainer.
That's crazy. Why was this so complex, and how did this help you at SpaceX?
Yeah, totally. Great question. Yeah, so this was essentially like a 3D mat that followed the contour of the pool. The pools were very weird shaped, and so the floor had to be very weird shaped as well to match the bottom of the floor. And as it came up, it had to come up such that it was like hugging the entire circumference of the pool as it beached the whale. And so he's like, you don't want to cause more harm or cause a greater safety issue while you're trying to save, a person. So it was just a very complex shaped object that has never been done before. And it required a lot of technology that, really had to be developed by, it was a contract company that did a lot of the development, but I was like kind of overseeing it from like the Seaworld perspective.
Wow. So even though it kind of fell apart, it worked?
It worked, yeah, it totally worked. We went on, I helped build one in San Diego and San Antonio and Orlando. And then, that they were functional until after I left SeaWorld.
You don't have a rocket science background, at least in school?
No, so I have a few degrees. One's basically in controls engineering, which is what I did at SpaceX and SeaWorld. Essentially, all the valve sensors, all the control of the launch pad is what was in my purview. Essentially, like the fluids guys and mechanical guys would design their system, and I would have to make it work, essentially, from a electrical standpoint. Between that, and I also have a degree in mathematics, and so like all the hard math that we had to do, like it was right up my alley.
AKA, you're very smart.
Yeah, there's a lot smarter people at SpaceX than I was, but yeah, no, it's it doesn't really take a lot of, I don't know. A different definition I would say is it takes a willingness to learn how to solve the problem, which most people could do.
Right.
Most people could do my job.
I don't know about that. I don't think I could.
I disagree.
Phillip says SeaWorld ultimately removed the whale lift they made, but that out-of-the-box problem solving helped him land a job at SpaceX.
When SpaceX released a video animation of a rocket landing back on land for the first time, it was just a cartoon, and I knew immediately like I needed to be a part of that. And so I started applying for jobs at SpaceX. I got an interview once they wanted me to design an oxygen sensor for Dragon, I believe. And I was just honest with the guy that called me at the time and just said that probably wasn't my area of expertise. And I kept applying it, jobs that were in my area of expertise, and I wasn't hearing back from them. And finally I got the courage, and on LinkedIn, I remember finding out who either the VP of HR or something like that was. And I was like, you need to hire me. I've worked on some epic stuff. And I don't remember the exact message, something like that. And I got a phone call from some HR person like the next day.
Oh my gosh, I love that tenacity. Enamored with the mission of SpaceX, Phillip knew he wanted to work there. But as many people know, SpaceX is not an easy place to get a job. In fact, it's one of the most sought-after companies to work for, and it's also a battle once you get the job to keep up with the demand. So you emailed someone on LinkedIn with HR, and then who ultimately interviewed you for the job?
Yeah, so I remember it was actually on Gwendolyn's birthday, October 16th, 2014. So we had a 10-year anniversary just recently. But anyway, yeah, I got the interview on her birthday. We were living in a hotel on Cocoa Beach while our house was being built. And I went in for the interview, and the main guy there, the chief interviewer, was Ricky Lim, who I still talk to. He's a good friend of mine. But he was a hard person to interview for. I'm not sure if you've met him before.
Haven't met him, but I read about him in the book. Tell me why.
He's super sharp. He's a sharp character. Yeah, I got asked a lot of really hard, tough questions. I was doing equations and circuits on the board for hours. And by the end of it, my brain was fried. And I remember they asked me like one simple question, something to do with like Ohm's law, which in my world is simple. And I was like, I don't remember exactly the definition or like exactly the terminologies, but I'll just do the math and I'll do the schematic for you and it'll work. And so I did it, and it worked. But going back to the Seaworld relevance is after the interview, they took me on a tour of the launch pad, and they asked me if I could identify any of the components that I saw in the launch pad. And it just so happens enough that all the components that they were using on the launch pad is what we were using on the lifting platform for the killer whales. And so I could have written like a PhD thesis on those very specific parts. So it was just like very serendipitous.
So did that kind of like sell them?
Yeah, I think like they're like, oh crap, he knows everything about these things. Like, all right, cool.
I was gonna say, which were harder, like your college tests or like your SpaceX interview?
The SpaceX interview was very intense. Yes. Yeah. But I've had some pretty hard college tests too.
I was gonna say.
I would, looking back, I think the SpaceX interview was very hard, but I smile when I think back to Ricky asking me all those ridiculous questions that he asked me.
Phillip says even with confidence in his own knowledge and problem-solving abilities, there were still many days he didn't realize what he had signed up for.
I started off at Slick 40 because they were currently launching F9. And then I spent a few weeks there, like learning the ropes of the existing control engineers that were already there. And then I went over to 39A and that became my baby. Hardest challenge, I would say there's been a few hard moments. I'll try to go in pretty quick, but Falcon Heavy, that was a very complicated beast. I was one of the lead engineers on for the launch pad on. It just required us to basically triplicate everything that we were doing, and the timing mechanisms to launch that rocket are very tight and complex. And I remember when we were trying to fuel it for the first time, we had a ton of sensors measuring like the loads going into the booster, into the F end, and the loads weren't matching what the structures engineers were predicting. And so we had to stop loading like many times, like 10 or 20 times. I can't remember the exact number, but we couldn't load the rocket because the structural engineers thought that it was going to break essentially. I had done all my homework. I kind of knew this was going to happen. And so I had all the math done. I had all the circuits like really well packaged together. And then pretty much everyone that had ever heard of a load cell or a strain gauge at SpaceX was coming to me to basically double check my numbers or double check my data because, it was more conceivable that I was wrong than they were wrong. And so luckily, long story short, the structural engineers found like the issue with their analysis, and we ended up being fine. And the next time we tried to load the rocket, it loaded. And and by that point we had worked out all the bugs on automation. So when you listen to like the first Falcon Heavy launch countdown, like everyone just seemed so cool, crisp. Like we knew like we had it. Like we were so ready for that moment. It was pretty epic.
I wonder if the SpaceX team, with the recent booster catch and the Mechazilla, if they also felt so ready. And
yeah, I'm sure they until you do it, a test is worth 1,000 theories. But I'm sure they had the same exact feeling. I feel like watching those countdowns, they go so smooth now. They've definitely like they've matured their process dramatically in the past 2 years. To the point where you don't even see any issues anymore on countdown.
Well, it's interesting too, because I went to LA and I interviewed Tom Mueller, and he's obviously like employee number one. Yep. And so you're kind of like, I
was like employee number 1,000.
There you go. The early Falcon 9 days of SpaceX were not as desperate as the very beginning of the company, but there were challenges SpaceX faced that no one else had solved before. In Eric's book, he mentions how Phillip was integral in helping SpaceX figure out how to densify liquid oxygen and how to store something so tricky to handle. SpaceX gets a lot of recognition for being the first private company to launch and return a booster, send a spacecraft and humans to the ISS, and more. But you might not know about these technical achievements, like super densifying liquid oxygen, or why this is so important for a rocket's capability. For people that don't know a lot about this, tell me like maybe why this is an important thing to do.
Yeah.
And how did SpaceX change the game?
Yeah, it's really crazy that no one had tried this before. So rocket engines or modern rocket technology, the equations aren't going to really change much in the coming decades to make it, dramatically better. And so what SpaceX did by doing densification was kind of just like, untapping, one of the last reserves, big jumps and leap of power you could get from a traditional rocket engine by cooling the propellant down to fitting, more of it in the same exact volume. Yeah, and it's really basic from a physics standpoint. It's really basic. It follows the ideal gas equation, which is, pretty simple. It's just the pressure times volume is equal to the number of atoms of oxygen times by a constant times by the temperature. So long story short, as you reduce the pressure, the temperature will drop. And so that's what's happening. It's actually happening to the liquid nitrogen. We drop the pressure of the liquid nitrogen, which drops the temperature of the liquid nitrogen, and then we flow it through a heat exchanger, which at the same time chills down the liquid oxygen. So it's not crazy science that what we did. However, trying to control it was pretty difficult. As I said, liquid oxygen does not want to be densified. It's constantly fighting you, and it's constantly breaking your equipment. And so I think that's the reason why no one's done it before, is because it's pretty hard to control. It requires a lot of testing and a lot of breaking equipment to really dial in the process. But it does give you, I think it gives a 9 to 10% performance boost to the rocket. So I think the newer space companies will end up doing some version of it, because it does give you a pretty good boost for performance, but it does come at a cost where you have to put in the R&D to develop that sort of processes.
So this new densified LOX hasn't become an industry standard yet?
No, I haven't seen it anyway. I think the only other rocket that I know of anyway doing it is, I think Super Heavy uses baby densified LOX, where they just flow it through a heat exchanger with nitrogen, but they don't pull a vacuum on it. At least that's when I was there that was happening. So instead of pulling it down to negative 342 degrees, it's only negative 320 degrees-ish, and it's a lot easier to control, because you can use the nitrogen as a gas instead. With the super densification, you need to use a lot of helium to counteract it.
It sounds like some of the trade-offs are better performance, right? And then also you can have bigger payload, right?
Yeah, bigger payload, better performance, but really at the end of the day, you're just you're fitting more propellant in the same volume of rocket, and so you get extra 10% gas range on your car. Essentially, is what you're looking at. You put and so it's a good bang for the buck once you invest in that development.
Who said, okay, let's try something that no one's done?
Yeah, I wasn't part of the team that made that decision, or even the initial testing, which was done in McGregor. I do remember early on in the day, they were talking about using hydrogen to do densification. There was all kinds of crazy ideas going around, but the end of the story is they wanted to land the rocket, and to do that, you really have to push the boundary of physics to achieve that.
In fact, they pushed the boundary so much they even reached out to the National Institute of Standards and Technology to ask about these theoretical measurements, and found out this hadn't been tried in real life ever.
If you look in a science book, it'll talk about things like triple point. It'll talk things like ideal gas law and the temperatures of liquid nitrogen, what temperature does nitrogen freeze, what temperature does liquid oxygen freeze. You can find all that information in any textbook, and it's all theoretical. Once you actually start trying to do it, and then you get down to the numbers, and that's where you soon discover that what's in textbooks may not be exactly what is happening in nature. And so I think we contacted NIST, who's the government people that would know how to measure at these temperatures, and they're like, yeah, we've never done that before. We're just, pretty much extrapolating these numbers to figure out, to put in a textbook almost. And so, it was really interesting to be one of the first ones in that area that I know of anyway.
So were you part of the original, let's test it and see if we can make this work?
At the launch pads, like I said, they did it before I don't know what the size or scale they were doing in McGregor, but I remember getting we got cliff notes from the McGregor folks on how to do it. So we didn't, from the launchpad perspective, we weren't going into it blind. We had a rough idea how to do it. However, we still had to do design and build all the processes at the launchpad and validate the processes to make it work.
And so is there any way to explain, kind of like for dummies, how you were able to do it?
Yeah, it was really kind of funny. It started off, we had zero automation, and we knew the general steps, kind of like, how to cook brownies. We knew the general steps how to do it. And so we've manually opened valves, we manually turned on pumps, we turned on, we'd set the pumps to the, speeds that we thought it was going for. And we had different measurements, especially we were looking at, I remember specifically looking at the level of the liquid nitrogen, because we were flirting with the temperature at which the nitrogen would freeze. And so I remember constantly staring at the level gauge or the RTDs on the liquid nitrogen, because if the level gauge would flatline, you knew that it froze solid, and then you were done until it thawed, which would take hours potentially. So I remember that specifically as like staring at the liquid nitrogen, trying not to let it freeze.
Well, then you had the issue of storing it, right?
Yeah, so I think Launchpad 40 had the biggest issue with storing it. The launch ball, or the LOX ball that they got from down the street, it worked great for like just regular liquid oxygen, which is negative 297 degrees Fahrenheit. But we found out quickly that once we tried putting like densified liquid oxygen into it, the insulation inside the LOX sphere was not that great, and so it absorbed a lot of heat, especially from the atmosphere in Florida is just ridiculous. And so we were losing a ton of heat, and the liquid oxygen was warming up, and it wasn't as cold as it needed to be. So I remember a lot of effort being spent in trying to figure out how to store the liquid oxygen at Launchpad 40.
SpaceX has done so many firsts, or really done things that no one else has tried, and this is just another example of that maybe not a lot of people know about, this whole idea.
Yeah, and you honestly, until you do it, you don't know what you don't know, and that's arbitrary to say, but it's like you just have to decide that you're going to do it, and just know that you're going to hit the most ridiculous problems along the way, and you have to overcome them. And you overcome enough problems, and you get to launch the rocket.
Why do you think this hasn't become an industry standard yet?
It's really hard, and it's just, I think most of the newer space companies, they're just trying to get to orbit. It's probably on their radar. It's like, hey, if we need a 10% performance boost, like we can go down this path. It obviously works, but it's like if you're trying to get to space, you better learn to walk before you try running first.
You wore a lot of different hats at SpaceX. Yes. Do you think that's kind of just like the culture overall?
100%. It's you get hired as an electrical engineer, you hired as a mechanical engineer, fluid engineer. That's your primary job, but your most, at least when I was there, your most important job is whatever the most important problem is that day. And it doesn't matter if you have knowledge in that field, if you can help at all solve that problem so you can get to the next problem, that's your priority.
SpaceX doesn't only challenge the minds of talented engineers, but it takes a toll on your personal life as well. Phillip says he landed his job the same day he got engaged and left his job a few years later to spend time with his family. A family that was very much a part of his SpaceX journey, moving to Brownsville with him in 2018. Were you guys already dating when you joined SpaceX?
Yeah, we were dating, and it's funny. After the interview, I went back to the hotel, which was on the beach at Cocoa Beach, and my wife was out paddling because it was her birthday, and I paddled out and I dropped off the board and proposed to her. So I had the job interview, her birthday, and engaged the same day.
Oh my gosh, that's so sweet.
Yes.
Did it just immediately ramp up, or did it take a while to get to the crazy workload?
It came in waves, depending on the thing. So I remember I burnt out twice at SpaceX. The first time was I was one of the lead engineers for Falcon Heavy, and I was doing all the design packages for Falcon Heavy. And at the same time, I had to go over and help Launchpad 40 recover from Amos. And so I remember specifically spending like 20 days, at least 3 weeks. I was down in the dungeon at Launchpad 40, rewiring thousands of sensors with all the technicians. And I was down there for, the good portion of the day for 20 days straight. And then I remember finally when I was done, I rewired the whole launch pad with the team. And I remember going back to Launchpad 39A, and I was just like, oh my God, this is This is ridiculous.
Did it make you want to quit at the time?
It didn't make me want to quit, but I soon, after Falcon Heavy launched, I started trying to, I told my boss at the time that I needed to find a new job in the company, and so I went around to the different sites, and I looked at Starlink, and I looked at in Los Angeles, and then I flew to Brownsville, and I just liked that Brownsville, the Starship program, was kind of like a clean slate. It could have been, it was basically like a blank canvas, and that's why we decided to move there.
So you had to move to Brownsville?
Yeah, August 1st, 2018, I picked up my family and we moved to South Padre Island. And I was the third employee for Boca Chica. And when I got there, it was just a mound of dirt along the ocean.
Right. And it's, oh my gosh, it's changed so much. It changes every day.
I need to go back just to see it. But yeah, it's just insane what has happened down there. And there was nothing there. I was only supposed to be going there to do the controls for the Starship program. I had already done like my PDR for Starship for controlling the launch pad. My brain was thinking I was just going there to do that. And so when I get there, August 1st, 2018, there's just a pile of dirt and that's it. And I quickly learned that I would be taking on a lot more responsibility and roles in the coming weeks and months.
One of those was like moving all that dirt, right?
Yeah, so I became a civil engineer real quick. We were trying to hire companies to come and do the civil engineering and all the earthwork, and the estimates were coming back absolutely ridiculous. And then I'm not sure whose idea it was Murator's or mine or a mixture, but we decided to rent the equipment and we would do it ourselves. And I definitely had no idea what I was getting myself into, but it was probably the best, worst time of my life.
Wow.
For sure. It was primarily me and my coworker Sam, and we were in a front loader and a dump truck, a 30-ton dump truck, for months, moving that dirt from the launch pad down to where the Starhopper landing pad was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was absolutely insane.
But working at SpaceX isn't for the faint of heart and does run its course. For Phillip, he knew when it was time to leave, but it wasn't easy.
I was burnt out. I hadn't seen my family in over a month. This was Thanksgiving time, 2019. And yeah, long story short is I was lucky. I had a lot of mentors that worked at NASA for the Commercial Crew Program, and they told me that the moment was coming where I would probably have to make the choice between my job or my family. And because they had to make that choice during the shuttle program, and most of them didn't make the best choice. They chose their job over family. And so they warned me of that, and they gave me a lot of really good advice. And so I kind of recognized that moment. And I was very burnt out. This was after I think serial number 1, I think is what we called it, had just popped on the test stand, and I was just working a crazy amount of hours. I was the acting director at the time, and I was also doing my controls engineering job for the launch pad, and it was just too much. And I could have raised my hand. I could have delegated more work to other people, but it was just the right time to let go.
How hard was that?
It was very hard. I had severe anxiety after I left, because I went from basically going the speed of light to basically a standstill, and then COVID happened, and it was really hard to adapt to that, for sure.
Phillip, who grew up in Maine, decided to return with his family to a simpler life, planting fruit trees and enjoying raising his kids in nature.
You're in the southwest corner of Maine, Waterboro, Maine, pretty much on the New Hampshire border. It's kind of a hidden gem. We're up at a pretty high elevation, at least for the state of Maine. We're 700 feet in elevation. We moved up here, basically they put me on sabbatical, and we came up here during the holidays, and we kind of just finalized, like, this is where we want to raise our kids, and we started enacting that plan. And then I was still on sabbatical through a good part of the new year, and they were trying to get me to come back, and I just I think I made the right choice, and I hung up my hat. Life like after SpaceX. Yeah, so we are currently trying to build the largest astronomical observatory in Maine. There's not a lot to offer for learning opportunities, advanced learning opportunities for children or students in southern Maine, and so we are trying to provide that here. So we have a 12-inch telescope. We're going to be building a 24-inch telescope that'll all be remotely controlled by students around the state of Maine. And yeah, we're really trying to bring a piece of space to here and seeing what we can do to engage with students to really spark their interest in STEM education. So this is a 12-inch telescope. It was donated to us. It's a reflecting telescope, and we use it for our visual observations of things like the planets, and also we could see the comet with it, the moon, the craters inside the moon. And then we have refracting telescopes that can take pictures of nebula and galaxies and all sorts of good stuff that's hidden in our universe.
And you guys are having this open to the public?
Yeah, so we open to the public on clear nights when we are capable. And we have people come look at, various things, planets and other sorts of things. And it's really interesting to see everyone's varied expression when they see either the rings of Saturn or the great spot on Jupiter for the first time.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So it must be pretty laid back and safe in Maine if you're just letting people.
Yeah, no, this is the safest place that
Yeah.
I've experienced in the United States.
Wow.
And that's what's so perfect about the telescope is you only need their attention for a split second. They put their eye up to the telescope, they see a planet or they see a comet, and it instantly, that image is for them for the rest of their life, regardless if they try to forget it or not. And they'll be like, hey, I looked at Saturn last night. I'm wondering what those moons are that were around it. And
That's
it just goes down you just go down the rabbit hole from there. So you just need to provide a spark. That's it.
Yeah. Phillip not only wants to help students in Maine, but he's leading an effort to bring a space economy to the Pine Tree State.
Maine, in my opinion, is really well suited to really, kind of mimic what we saw in Brownsville, going from zero space economy to an absolute behemoth. We have a lot of talent in the state of Maine that's untapped. We have a lot of industry that's, kind of fizzling out a bit. And so, yeah, we're trying to get some players interested in moving their companies here. And we're looking at building a spaceport potentially where we'd have a launch pads because we have an awesome shot at a polar orbit. So yeah, like if anyone's looking to really, attract some top tier talent, we're really close to a lot of prestigious universities that can provide that. And we have a lot of space and a lot of willing people to really engage in those activities.
What is your advice to, gosh, the SpaceX fan base is huge and only growing. What is your advice to, a young student who watches this and they want to be you?
Yeah, totally. So I would suggest, and I tell this to all the students that ask me that same exact question, is find out something that you're passionate in, whether it be fluids engineering, mechanical engineering, controls, programming, whatever, and find a niche and become the expert in that niche. So for example, in control engineering, my expertise is in a device called a variable frequency device. Long story short, it's how you control the speed of a motor. And I became the expert on that device. And that skill really helped me get noticed at SpaceX because I was the person that could solve those problems. And they had a lot of those problems. And so, yeah, become an expert in one single field and it'll really pave your career for the rest of your life.
That's great advice. Phillip says he still watches SpaceX hit big milestones with a sense of pride, support, and a tinge of longing. What were your thoughts watching that booster catch?
My thoughts were, I know some of the people on the team, and I just, just trying to picture like their reactions because I know like they're just like, have probably the biggest smiles on their faces, and I'm their biggest cheerleader for the most part. I watch pretty much all the major events, and I really do, we still hope the best, and we hope the most for them anyway.
When was the last time you were there?
It was early 2020.
Okay, so you haven't seen a Starship launch yet?
No, I want to go, but at the same time is like, I just know that it'll open up a lot of feelings that I'm not sure if I want to open up or not. So.
Really?
Yeah, Yeah.
Like
Want to go back and
a little bit of FOMO?
Yeah, I definitely, for sure. I'm definitely jealous, of some of the things that they're doing.
How often do you think about your days at SpaceX?
Daily.
Yeah.
Every day.
Really?
Yeah, every day. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like just like random, or is it like usually there's a theme, or?
Yeah, no, it's like going to the best rock concert of your life, and the next day you wake up and you just wish it could have kept going.
Oh, really? I feel like not everyone might say that.
Oh no, it was a drug, especially there. I was talking to Shannon about this yesterday. The early 39A days were absolutely just mind blowing. It was just so much fun. It's like the most fun engineering that exists on this earth.
Really?
Yeah, totally fun.
Why?
Just the group. There was a small group of us, and we were told to build a playground.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a SpaceX survivor?
No, I don't think so. I hear that, but I loved my job. I would have done it for free. When it was time to end, it ended at the correct point in chapter. Boca Chica had gotten to a point where it was always going to stand on its leg and become what it is today. So yeah, no, I feel like it was the correct moment in time for that chapter to close.
Do you think there should be a movie about the SpaceX story?
Yes and no. I mean, if they could capture what it was really like, absolutely. But I'm sure they would probably add some drama to it that did or did not exist.
There's always embellishment, but it's just such an incredible story.
It's just a bunch of nerds playing. That's all we were. I wish, I don't even know all the stories. I only know like the small sliver that I was lucky to be a part of. But yeah, it's luckily the internet has come along and they've documented all these things for future generations to look back on and study, and I'm sure at some point there'll be a much larger book written about this chapter in space history.
While you were there, was it always clear we got to get to Mars?
Yeah, I remember actually having that on my OneNote with it was something along the line of like, make sure every decision you make today has that goal in mind of, is this going to help us get to Mars?
Wow.
So for sure, it's like, you got to think about it. And when I did my my PDR for the control system for the Starship launchpad, at the very end, the very last slide, I included a slide on how I would adapt that control system to work on Mars and essentially bury it. I had the idea of burying it in these sealed pods underground so that radiation wouldn't get to it. So it's like thinking ahead is like, all right, I have to build like this next generation control system. How is this going to transpire to Mars?
And do you think SpaceX will achieve their goal?
Totally, 100%. Not worried about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because not everyone thinks that.
They'll get there.
But they also didn't think that, they could catch a booster in chopstick arms.
Yeah, they'll 100% get there. It may take a little bit longer than, they want, but it'll happen.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you to Phillip for letting me come to his house and see his beautiful observatory and to learn more about the SpaceX story. I will never get sick of telling this story, and I hope that you guys enjoy learning more about the people behind the success of SpaceX.